Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our AJA Zoom session. According to the Hebrew calendar, it's Yom Ha'atzmaut because it's after nightfall in Australia. So welcome to everybody, and both to our regulars and any new people this week. Also, welcome to those watching on Facebook. And we do also have people who listen to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Jewish Community Radio. That can be found in Melbourne, FM 88, or at j-air.com.au. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. On your screens, you can also see David Adler, who's President of the AJA, as well as Michael Bird, my former co-host of Nothing Left, who's going to participate in the session tonight too. You will also see our special guest for tonight, Mordechai Kedar, a well-known Israeli scholar of Arab culture and a lecturer at Bar-Ilan University. And of course, tonight the topic is internal and external threats to Israel. The topic is, as usual, there'll be an interview-style discussion and then we'll take questions. And as always, I'll mention that if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand electronically. The way to do that is in the chat function, in the reaction function, sorry. Just click on the button and that lets us know that you want to ask a question and we'll put you in the line. You can write questions into the chat and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. And speaking of the chat, if you don't like the chat group, because some people find it a bit distracting, if you just click on the chat button at the bottom, it will activate and deactivate the chat function according to your will. Okay, Michael, it's over to you. You can start the ball rolling.
Yes, thanks, Alan. If I had to go through Dr. Mordechai Kedar's full bio, it would take up most of our session. So I'll try to condense it as much as possible so we can get on with the show. Dr. Mordechai Kedar, an Israeli scholar of Arabic culture, holds a PhD from Bar-Ilan University, where he's a senior research associate at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. He served for 25 years in the IDF military intelligence, specializing in Syria, Arab political discourse, Arab mass media, Islamic groups, and Israeli Arabs. And he is an expert on the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups. Mordechai is the Middle East analyst of the daily newspaper, Makor Rishon, as well as other publications, and the author of many books too numerous to list. Mordechai is a frequent speaker on YouTube. Now do yourself a favor and watch one particular video, my favorite, where Mordechai appears on Al-Jazeera vigorously arguing the case for Israel in Arabic. Obviously, there'll be subtitles in English. It's absolutely fantastic. I've put the link on the chat chart there so you can have a look at it. Dr. Kedar is a frequent guest in the Israeli, Arab, and international media. Mordechai is most well known for his non-political correctness, telling it as it is, sometimes having his woke Jewish communal hosts choke on their challah, as he once found out on a visit to Australia. AJA is honoured once again to host Dr. Mordechai Kedar to our Australian audience. Shalom, Mordechai, and on behalf of our AJA supporters, welcome back to another AJA Zoom event.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I also thank Alan and David and all the other friends from Australia. Good evening, good Yom Ha'atzmaut. We're still here in Yom HaZikaron. I just came back from the local cemetery, military cemetery here in Ra'anana, where I live. 4 of my friends' children, sons, are buried there. 3 of them are Olim Chadashim from the States, from Britain. Yes. This is the price of freedom. This is the price of independence. And this is a price for living with our head lifted up as Jews, which is, we were not used to such life during 2,000 years of exile. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel celebrates 74 years of independence. And yes, while looking backwards to see our friends buried, who were killed in the wars for independence, for the existence of in this Middle East, we are also looking backwards to see the point which Israel started from. We didn't start from zero. We started from way beyond the zero, below the zero, under the zero. The Jewish people was not existing as a people, as a nation, until 100 years ago. People were communities, a community in Iraq, a community in Australia, a community in the States, a community in Britain, in Poland, in many other countries, communities which struggled to survive, communities which didn't have even a common language, because, you know, communities in Europe were speaking Yiddish or English or French. Communities in the Arab worlds were speaking Arabic. Communities in the Spanish-speaking countries were speaking Ladino. They could not even communicate with each other, let alone cooperate. Eretz Israel was in theory. Eretz Israel was a direction of prayer. Eretz Israel was something which people dreamt about. Eretz Israel was not a reality in no community's life, actual life. And the Zionist organization actually succeeded against all odds and against objection from outside the Jewish nation and from inside the communities. For those who didn't believe in it, those who believed that we should be Russians or Polish or Iraqi, yes, in that time was such a community in Iraq as well. There were people who thought that our redemption will be if we assimilate. Hitler came and reminded us that this is no solution. On the contrary. And we have to be the best violinist in America or in Australia or wherever we are. And this is our future. And this was the, not to mention, even we should mention the Haredi objection, which said that we all have to wait until the Mashiach comes and redeems us all. Until then, we have to live within the Goyim. Yes, you know, the first Zionist conference wanted to convene in London, and the Londonian Jewish community was objected it. The same thing happened in Paris. The same thing happened in Zurich. So they went to Basel, to a place which nobody heard about. Okay, and to that degree, even the Jewish objection was, in addition, not to mention to the Islamic objection, the Arab objection, and many others. So this is where the starting point was, way below the zero. And look at what happened. Israel is a miracle, not because it redeemed the Jews, but because it is a reality in spite of the fact that 100 years ago, nobody believed, very few people believed that this is a reality. Herzl, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you want, it will not be a story. It will be a reality. So, and this is where we have to look backwards to the starting point and to be proud that the Jewish nation, fragmented as it was, dispersed as it was, and you know what? As it is in some parts until this very day, succeeded. Everyone contributed. This one came, this one sent his son, this one sent his money, this one sent his blessing. Also, we did this, and this one supported us in all kinds of international corridors in order to make sure that countries in the world will support this thing. Another thing we have to remember, that some of our friends, or those who look like our friends were actually our enemies. And this is something which people tend to ignore. And I'm talking about those who supported Hitler. And when we commemorate the victims of the Shoah, we talk about the victims of the Germans and those nations which supported them. Usually people mention in this supporters the Ukrainians, yes, the Ukrainians, the Polish, yes, the Polish, the Latvians, the Lithuanians, and there were some others who supported, including Arabs, like the Mufti, who incited to exterminate the Jews so they don't come to Palestine, the Palestinian Mufti, and the Libyans, who, when Rommel occupied Libya, they hunted the Jews in order to send them to 2 concentration camps in Libya. People are not aware of this, but yes, there were 2 concentration camps in Libya, in addition to what happened in Europe. So, but one nation succeeded to sneak out from this infamous list of nations, and this is the British nation. British? Yes, Britain. Britain put a blockade on the shores of Eretz Israel and did not enable Jews to run away from Europe to Eretz Israel, the only place in the world which would accept them, because America closed its gates, Canada closed its gates. The Canadian Minister of Migration said none are too many when he related to the St. Louis ship, which in 1939 looked for a harbor to bring 900 Jews who ran away from the upcoming war. None is too many. That's what the Canadian minister said. Cuba closed the gates. Every country, but England or Britain had an obligation by the mandate to Eretz Israel to enable mass Jewish migration to Palestine, Eretz Israel. From all the nations in the world, Britain had a commitment which was written in the mandate, which was given to Britain in 1923 by the League of Nations. From all the nations, Britain betrayed its commitment and did not allow Jews to come here. So in 1941, when Hitler saw that nobody allows Jews to flee to any country, and Britain put a blockade on the seashore of Eretz Israel, so he started this idea of the final solution, the industrialized extermination of Jews. And Britain actually sneaked out in some miraculous way from this list of infamous nations which took part in a way or another in the Shoah. The British responsibility, not from the Shoah, but for the magnitude, for the size of the Shoah, is tremendous. And people tend to forget it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now talking about Israel, the only state in the world which is threatened by the existence of Israel is threatened. Countries which are members of the United Nations keep saying time and again, death to Israel. I'm not sure that Australia would tolerate any country in the United Nations which will call upon the whole world to come and exterminate the state of Australia. Okay, but we have to hear it time and again. And unfortunately, too many countries in the world are sitting with the Iranians, or some would say in bed with the Iranians, because of many other considerations, economic considerations, or whatever considerations they have. And they more or less don't hear all these slogans, death to Israel. Unfortunately, those who cite death to Israel also tend to cite death to America. And by unexplained way, Americans are sitting with the Iranians in order to negotiate with them anything. Would anyone in the world buy a used car from these liars after they lied on the whole world time and again for many, many years. They are lying. And, you know, I once heard an American politician who asked me not to quote him, not to mention his name. He says, how do I know the Iranians are lying? Their lips are moving and you hear their voice. So you know that they are lying because they are compulsive liars. Look, they signed the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which enabled them to receive all kinds of knowledge about the nuclear issue. After all, they signed the non-proliferation. Israel stole, like 5 years ago, the Iranian archive of the nuclear military program, and Israel proved to everyone in the world that Iran was lying on the world because Iran actually had a clandestine program to develop nuclear weapons after they signed the NPT. What did the world do with this information? Not much. They gave the Iran the 2015 agreement, the JCPOA, as if they will abide to anything which is written in this.
Yeah. Mordechai, sorry, I'd just like to interrupt a little bit because we want to ask you some particular questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. But let me just finish the sentence.
Yeah. Finish what you. Yeah.
And the threat of Iran is so imminent, is so clear, and this is actually the most, I would say, dangerous external danger which looks at Israel, and it has influence on many others, because what you see today from Hamas and for the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, you see the coalition, or I would say the empire, which Iran built with the years, with Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Gaza. This is an empire, and this is a real threat on the state of Israel. So yes, Michael.
Look, just to start things off, I'd like to ask you, in the context of Russia's disastrous invasion of Ukraine and the likelihood of weakening its military, its political influence, and even of its economy, what effect will this have on Israel's main foe, meaning obviously Iran, including its involvement in Syria and funding of Hezbollah? I mean, in other words, is there any good outcome from Russia's blunder in Ukraine?
First of all, I'm not so sure that you can define it as a blunder. Yes, the Russians had different plans. I think that they planned to topple the Ukrainian defense within a week, and are already there sinking in the mud for 2 months and more already. But I'm not sure that Russia as a superpower will be immensely affected by this. Yes, they have problems with the gas, with the export, with the boycott, with many other things. Yet, Russia, after all, is not a democracy. And a democracy, in democracy, you can change a regime if the regime doesn't deliver. But in Russia, it's not a democracy. This is some kind of autocracy. And I'm not sure that Putin, look, somebody could shoot him in the head. I don't know. But if he's not being shot in the head, I think that he will find a way how to survive politically, economically, although they might suffer from some, problems. I wouldn't say Kaddish yet on Russia. We have to wait. But when it comes to us, the conclusions which Israel derives from what happens in Ukraine are very, very important. First of all, we see a country which had a document named the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed by Ukraine, Russia, United States, Britain, and France in 1994 in order to convince the Ukrainians to give up on their nuclear weapons. And they did, in exchange to a promise, a commitment from all the signatories for the territorial contiguity of the Ukraine. Nobody will take parts from the Ukraine in the future. This was signed in 1994. In 2014, Russia took over the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine and annexed it to Russia. Where is the world? Where is the memorandum? Where is the commitment of all those signatories, let alone Russia, America, Britain, France? Where are all those guarantors who are signed on this document? And not to mention what happens now means that international documents worth maybe the value of the page which they are written on, which could be 1 penny or maybe even less. This is the value of international commitments. This is the value of international agreements. And you can mention also the NPT, which was supposed to stop the Iranian aspirations to nuclear weapons. So here and these are the conclusions which we in Israel should, and you know what, not only us, or every country in the world which feels vulnerable because of countries like Russia, like Iran, or China, I don't know which. And you know, near China, there are some countries who do not feel so comfortable recently, like the Philippines and others. So all these countries should know that they will be left alone when the test will come to the international community. America became a country which you cannot rely on. I'm not sure that any other Western country, Israel, or other countries like, Finland today. Finland today is joining NATO, not because they started to walk in London streets. They understand that if they don't become part of NATO, the Russians will do the same thing which they do in the UK, they'll do in Finland, which borders with Russia. Will the NATO membership will secure Finland? I have no idea. What? Will Britain send its soldiers to be killed in Finland's forests? Will France send its soldiers to get killed, to save Finland? I'm at all not sure. Okay, so here we are. What we see today is in my view, almost total collapse of, yes, the international community, if there is such a community. A collapse of agreements, or collapse of axioms, which we, as normal country, should build upon, should act upon, and should have our relations with other countries according to. So, and this is something which still we are in the make. We don't really see yet the consequences of what happens in Ukraine. I think that in a year or two, we will see it in much more, let's say, clear light, that the collapse of the international community actually is on the make.
Alan or David, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, David, I think, has got a few questions.
Yeah. Mordechai, thank you so much for joining us again. Always insightful to hear you speak. I want to ask you about some of the internal threats that we've seen emerge in Israel. There seems to have been a spike in terrorism, and with this last Ramadan, it's been moderately ugly. Is there an association between Ramadan and terrorism, and what's been going on in Israel this year?
Well, what goes on in Israel from internal point of view also is connected to the external. What do I mean? The security, I would say, doctrine of Israel was based on the idea that we have separate fronts. One front with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, another front with Syria, another one with Hamas or Gaza, another one with Iran. And well, after we closed the fronts with Egypt and Jordan, and we have like 5 fronts which have to be dealt with separately. Different Israeli parts of the army were dealing with different fronts. The Northern Command was dealing with Syria and Lebanon. The Southern Command was dealing with Gaza, and another command, the Depth Command, was dealing with Iran. And we thought for many years, and this actually what the situation was, that all these fronts were separate, and each and every one of them was acting according to its own agenda, according to its own interests, according to its own timetable and objectives. This is history. What happens during the last 2 years is actually a process which actually unifies the fronts. It started when Hezbollah invaded or went to Syria to get rid of ISIS, and here we are facing Hezbollah also in the Syrian arena. It continued when Hamas succeeded to ride the issues in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, and in the Temple Mount, which they call the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and in the Islamic movement inside Israel, which I have no idea why it is a legal movement, which also sits in the Knesset, surprisingly, succeeded to recruit them in order to undermine the stability inside Israel. And the means which they all used in order to unify, especially Hamas, in order to unify the fronts here in Israel, is actually the WhatsApp, the cell phone. Look, I'm a member in many Arab groups. Since I read Arabic and I write in Arabic, and I'm a member in many Arab groups. Also, let's say, for example, I say one, Khan Yunis Online. There is a group like this, and you can see the members of those groups according to the numbers of the phone. You see 972, which is Israel, 970, which is the Palestinian Authority, 971, which is the Emirates, 966, Saudi Arabia, 963, which is Syria, 964, which is Iraq, 20, which is Egypt, 44, Britain, +1 is America, and yes, 67, I think this is Australia as well. Yes, there are people, the Terrorist International. In every WhatsApp group you can find, and many more, phone numbers which testify that the members of these groups are people who live almost all over the globe. So when Hamas tells their people or their audience in the blogosphere or in the WhatsApp sphere, run to the streets and start burning houses or cars of Jews, they hear it everywhere. In Lod, in Acre, Akko, in Haifa, in Yafo, in Jerusalem, and in many other places as well. So here we are. We are now in a group of fronts which were galvanized by the social media, means WhatsApp, by the cell phone. Okay, and this is handy. This is accessible. Everyone has access to this cell phone, and everyone who wants joins either the WhatsApp group or the Telegram group. Look, WhatsApp group is limited to 200 and something, I think 57 or something like this, 256. It's 16 power, okay? Square 16, 256. This is the limit of WhatsApp. Telegram is like 25,000 members. So you can have almost unlimited number of members in Telegram, which is parallel to WhatsApp. and to communicate with the whole world and to send everybody to the streets. And this is what happened last May, exactly a year.
Got it.
And this is what we have to face today: a united front by Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, Jerusalem, the Islamists in Jerusalem, the Arabs, the Islamic movement in the north, in the south, the Bedouins in the south, and Jaffa. Okay, it looks like very, very hard, but Israel learned the lesson during the last year. And today, we assume that if it erupts again, the Israeli public sphere will deal with this in much better way. And many Israelis actually started acting accordingly. Look, even myself, I go around with this.
Good on you.
Yes,
Good on you.
Jews can shoot.
Yes.
I didn't walk around with weapon a year ago. It was in my safe. Okay, since then I go around with, and I'm not the only one. Of course, I'm licensed, everything. I go to train myself every year and a half. And yes, and I don't envy somebody who would come into my range. Okay, so this is what happens. Israel learned the lessons, and we do assume that if it erupts again, Israel will act accordingly, unlike what happened in 2021.
Okay. Alan, I can see we've got a stack of questions,
Yes.
so we should allow other people.
Okay, so just before we do that, if you're listening on JAIR, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is Mordechai Kedar, a well-known Israeli scholar, and we're talking about the internal and external threats to Israel. Just hand back to you, David, for a moment to tell everybody what's coming up next week.
Okay, just very briefly, everyone here at the end of the meeting, if you are not yet actively supporting AJA, we do need your help. Please go to the website jewishassociation.org.au, apply for membership if you're not yet a member, make a donation if you can do so. You can also join the email list there to be kept up to date with our events and news. Next week, we have a scholar from the UK, the founder of the Britain-Israel Communication and Research Centre, who will address the question about whether Israel is really a settler colony. And to give you a hint, he's written extensively to debunk that concept. And we have a very special event on in Melbourne this Shabbat. We are jointly hosting with Caulfield Shul after the Shabbat service, the Ukrainian ambassador to Australia. Don't miss that if you're in Melbourne. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a few hands lined up. I've got Ron, there's Anthony's computer, but that doesn't look like Anthony, although I suppose I shouldn't make those assumptions these days. Then Shoshana, Leon and Terry. We'll start with you, Ron. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, Mordechai. Can you hear me? Good. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Australia is a liberal democracy and nonetheless has a law called the Foreign Interference Act. And amongst other things in that act, it talks about foreign actors acting on against Australia's sovereignty and national interests. Now, in Israel, we have radical NGOs that arguably are motivated to act against Israel's national interests and sovereignty too. Why does Israel not have a similar law, or act in accordance with such law that it has got that, which liberal Australia has?
Well, definitely, we do have, in my view, too many anti-Zionist Jewish organizations. And when I talk about, they of course consider themselves to be totally Zionist by calling upon Israel to commit a mass suicide in front of us by establishing, for example, a Palestinian state, which will inevitably turn into another terror state, as it happened in Gaza. but they consider themselves to be Zionist and willing to promote Israel. Israel is very sensitive to its image. And when all kinds of liberals, or I don't know if they are really liberals, they are, in my view, they are totally off the way of thinking. But if they, like in France, in Britain, in America, criticize Israel for closing all kinds of NGOs, they criticize Israel for being a dictatorial state or too Jewish or things like this. And unfortunately, in Israel, the Foreign Affairs Ministry is run by people who are, let's say, tend to think the same way. And under the Minister of Foreign Affairs of today, Yair Lapid, but not only under him, also Peres led a very, very peaceful line, as if this will bring us the sympathy of the world. No, it did not bring us anything, sympathy from the world. And look, Israel is a democracy. Recently, like 2 years ago, we had the nation law. It's a basic law, means part of the constitution or the substitute of constitution, which says clearly that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, and no other people can use Israel as its nation state. Of course, many Arabs were against it, and even many Jews were against it because they don't like to be viewed as such a country. Okay, we do have our two liberal sectors here in Israel, but look, after all, they are our brothers. They fight with us in all the wars, and yes, politically they are totally mistaken. Look, even one Knesset member, Yair Golan, who was a deputy for the chief of staff here in Israel, he was a good fighter, but when he got out of the army, he became a member of Meretz. Meretz is an ultra-leftist party in the Knesset, which actually omitted the Zionism from its platform like 2 years ago. Okay, and so this is Yair Golan. On one side, he's a fighter, but the other side is all the way to the left, looks left and sees nobody. Okay, so this is, so what shall we do with him? Shall we close Meretz and kick him out of the Knesset? No, he is mistaken. Thank goodness the power of Meretz is not big. Unfortunately, the government of today is based on Meretz. The government of today has no majority in the Knesset. They don't have even 61 Knesset members to support them. Miraculously, they still continue to be Knesset, to be the government. But I think that their days are numbered, because they based on the Islamic movement, which I mentioned, which is, in my view, should not be even legal in this country, let alone run to the Knesset. Because they represent the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood have a very clear agenda to wipe Israel off the map. So why should they sit in the Knesset? To undermine Israel from within? But unfortunately, the Supreme Court, which is the bastion of the Israeli left, allowed them to run to the Knesset. And we are stuck with this Supreme Court. Let's hope that the next Knesset will be normal and will know how to limit the dictatorship of the Supreme Court, which once was a democracy here in Israel.
Thanks, Mordechai. So we've got Leon, you're next, and then Anthony's computer. So Leon, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, Dr. Kedar. Can you hear me?
Yes. You can hear.
Dr. Kedar, the Arabs and other Muslims who call themselves Palestinians are small in number. They do not have natural resources. Their only strategic value is as a potential base for further war against Israel. As far as I know, as a corporate entity, they've contributed nothing to the welfare of humanity. Why does the world mollycoddle them? In Hebrew, lama ha'olam mefanek otam.
Very big question, very good question. I think that the biggest motivation for any country in the world to support the Palestinian Authority is anti-Semitism. This is a way how to hit Israel by supporting people who do not even see reason for the existence of the state of Israel. Let me show you a scarf of the Palestinians, which they actually sell over the place. And this is by the PLO. See, this is the flag of the PLO. It's not even Hamas. On one side, they say, Al-Quds Lana, Jerusalem is ours. On the other side, it shows Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And you can see in demonstrations in New York, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Paris, London, and Sydney, and Melbourne as well, as much as I know, people who go around with this, not Palestinians, people who live down those places, who go around with this, supporting the Palestinians. Means they want to take Jerusalem in order to take the whole country. So where is Israel? Okay, and so whoever supports the PLO and its manifestation, means the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is actually acts in order to wipe Israel off the map. Because if this is Palestine, as it's written here, where is Israel? And this is, in my view, the core motivation of any country or any politician who supports the Palestinian Authority. They might cover it by all kinds of masks. No, we are not against Israel, but we are against the settlement. Guys, the Palestinians view Tel Aviv as a settlement. Haifa is a settlement. What the difference between because Tel Aviv is also occupied, because the difference between the occupation of Tel Aviv and the occupation of Ariel is only 19 years. This happened in 1948, and this happened in 1967. What is the big difference? Occupation is an occupation. Okay, so here we are. And unfortunately, countries which support the PA, and I'm afraid that Australia also supports the PA in one way or another, they actually support this kind of discourse against Israel, which is explicitly against the Jews, because it's anti-Semitic. Because by denying the right of Jews to live in Israel, in the land of Israel, and to restore their ancestors' homeland, this is pure anti-Semitism. Because, look, whoever will come to say in Australia, the Jews have no right to live in Australia, definitely will be viewed as an anti-Semite. The roots of Jews here in the state of Israel are way much deeper than the roots of the Jewish community in Australia. Okay, I'm talking about time-wise. So, what should we listen to somebody who tells us that we have no roots here in Israel? You know, and the most mind-boggling thing is when Jews coming to us, and I had this experience in the States. I had to sit with a lady on one panel which says that Israel is a settler state, and settler state should not be supported. I said, excuse me, what is America? America is not a settler state. And how many years you settlers are sitting in America? 250, 300 to the most. Okay, in Israel, our roots are at least 3,000 years. Documented in the history books of the Greeks and the Romans before the Jewish books.
Yeah.
Okay, so what that Israel is a settler state?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, exactly. Now, Anthony's computer, please unmute yourself. And then we've got Shoshana.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure.
I'm Hazel. I'm the other half, and my pronouns are definitely she and her. Russia has been referred to as an invader and an occupier. And unprecedented sanctions have been implemented against Russia as a result. My concern is invader and occupier are similar terms that have been applied by the left to Israel. And my concern is that once the Ukraine-Russian issue has been resolved, hopefully soon and peacefully, my concern is that the unprecedented sanctions are now going to give much greater impetus to the BDS movement against Israel. And I'm wondering what Dr. Kedar's response is to that and what could possibly be done to preempt and possibly prevent this.
Look, the BDS movement is definitely something which Israel doesn't like. But to say that the BDS movement is threatening the existence of the state of Israel, this is far from the reality. After all, businesses do business with Israel because, not because they love our name or our hairstyle. They make business because it's worth for them to make business with Israel. Because Israel is in internship, because of the Israeli technology, because of Israeli inventions, because of Israeli patents, many things which Israel has. And this, you see it in conferences which we have here in Israel, international conferences, many countries, even countries which do not have diplomatic relations with us. They couldn't care less about the BDS movement. They do what is good for them. And that's why the BDS, I think, is more in the media, maybe in campuses, but to say that the BDS movement is a threat on the existence of Israel, this is far from reality. Yes, we are aware of the problem, and we try to face it. But, you know, many of those BDS holes, as I call them, I think that they cannot be educated. Even if you prove to them that Israel is not an occupier, if you prove them that Israel is the best country in the world, they will not change their view. Because of this one is Islamist, this one is pro-Islamist, this one is pro-Palestinian. So, you know, there are, as you know, Christians would do, they are lost souls. We have no, let's say, hope to correct their thinking or their attitude to Israel. And this is why we don't spend much time and resources in order to change their minds. We do address the people who, let's say, would support us if they hear the right story. And here, where the Hasbara should work. I think that wasting time and resources on those who bash Israel time and again, this is really losing your time and losing your efforts.
Okay, thank you. Shoshana, you are next. I noticed you've got both your camera and microphone off. So if you're there, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Doesn't look like it. Okay, while we're waiting for Shoshana to come back, Bob, I think you are next and then Terry. So Bob, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I would like to ask a question about the sympathy of the world against Israel. Do you think that with the Abraham Accords that have proven over the last few years to be so successful, and with the potential that in a few years' time Saudi Arabia might join, perhaps Indonesia or other countries, do you think that there is a chance that people start to realize what Israel has got to offer, what the benefits are of creating normalization relationships? Do you think there's a potential for improvement, or do you think that the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is something to stay?
Well, as much as I know about the Middle East, I'm not a prophet yet. But as long as I'm not a prophet, I would refrain from saying what will happen in the future. I might give some ideas or some trends which I believe in, but knowing what will happen in the future, I don't know if Saudi Arabia will join. What do I mean? The Abraham Accords, especially with the Emirates, and Bahrain were initiated not 2 years ago, as we celebrate today. It was already 20 years ago when these countries started to work with Israel. And since they did not have diplomatic relations with Israel, the organ here in Israel which managed the relations with the Emirates was the Mossad, which is a well-known thing. Here we have the Mossad, and the Mossad was the link between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain. Everybody in the Emirates and Bahrain knew exactly where is the headquarters of the Mossad in their country is. So look, I know I have a friend who is a lawyer. He told me a year ago that for 15 years already, 15 years already, he represents companies from the Emirates in Israel, in the open air. Israel had relations, and he's the one who made the contracts, and he never hid it and never denied it. Okay, so we had relations with the Emirates beyond, under the sea, under the water. We didn't talk about this. They didn't talk about this, and this is how it was. The one who took it out from the darkness into the light was President Trump with Netanyahu. Netanyahu had some reservations, but Trump was the one to push it because of the evangelical community in the United States, especially a man named Pastor John Hagee, the leader of an organization named CUFI, Christians United for Israel. He is the one who pushed, by the way, he pushed also Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And Netanyahu was afraid that these things, means recognizing Jerusalem and open the relations with the Emirates to the open air, will create a wave of terrorism. So he was not enthusiastic to these two ideas, but since Trump was behind it, he actually succumbed to the pressures from Trump. And Netanyahu, of course, by being supported by Trump, he appeared as the strongman of the Middle East. And in this area where Iran threatens countries, like Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, they are looking for a strong man to get in touch with in order to protect themselves from the Iranian pressures. So here you are. Trump is behind Netanyahu. Netanyahu speaks in a very harsh language against the Iranians. He even stole with the Mossad, of course, the Iranian nuclear archive. And Netanyahu is brave enough to go to the American Congress in order to speak there against the willingness of Obama, the president. So Netanyahu is a man which we can rely on. Let's make relations with Israel in order maybe to deter the Iranians. So the Emirates went into this, and Bahrain as well. The Saudis gave them the blessing, means Birkat HaDerech, it's okay if you do it, but the Saudis themselves did not join it yet because of what happened in the mid-September of 2019. Those who remember might remember that night, the dark night in Saudi Arabia, when Iran destroyed half of the exporting ability of oil of Saudi Arabia within one night. 2 giant facilities were burnt in Saudi Arabia by Iran, and Saudi Arabia learned the lesson because no country in the world came to support Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, don't forget, depends on the oil export. And I think for like 5 months, they actually had big reduction in their in their oil production because of this hate of the Iranians. So the Saudis learned the lesson, and they are afraid of the Iranians because, first of all, Saudi Arabia's military ability is very limited. They have all the weapons in the world, but apparently they don't know how to use them. They didn't succeed to get rid of the Houthis in Yemen for almost 8 years of bloody war. Bloody war. The Saudis fail in this war in Yemen against the Houthis. Okay, so the Saudis have no really power to deter Iran, but therefore they are afraid of Iran. So they didn't join the relations with Israel. The Emirates, in my humble view, will cancel the relations with Israel if they get a threat from Iran. Means credible threat. If the Iranians will tell them, hey guys, we are going to destroy you as we destroyed the Saudi oil industry. We are going to hurt you the same thing. If you don't kick out the Israelis, they will kick us out in no time. They will not sacrifice their economy and their existence on the altar of the relations of Israel. Forget it. So we have to be realistic when it comes to this. Of course, I love these relations. I have invitations. I love what they say. And for the Israelis, yes, we do have good relations, and I have friends in the Emirates, in Bahrain as well. I might even go to visit them. But what I'm saying is that we should take these things in very, very carefully. How do I know? And this is history. We had relations, official relations with Qatar and Tunisia. These relations were made in the 90s based on the Oslo Accords. They made peace with us, both Qatar and Tunisia. And Israel had an official representation in these countries in the street with the Israeli flag, not the embassies, but commercial representation offices, official. Yet these relations were cancelled after the eruption of the Second Intifada in 2000. So things are reversible in the Middle East. And I would even say that policies in the Middle East are built on sand dunes, which change their position according to Matzav Haruach. Now, those who understand Hebrew understand this ambiguity. Matzav Haruach, the situation of the wind, but it's also according to the mood. Okay? So policies in the Middle East are changing according to the shifting sands of the Middle East. Nothing here is forever. Nothing here is secured. Peace, which we have, will last only as long as Israel is viewed as invincible. And also in this case, Israel will have temporary peace, which will last only as long as Israel is viewed as invincible. If Israel will be viewed as invincible forever, Israel will enjoy temporary peace forever.
Okay, that's very well put. Now we are coming up to time. Terry, please unmute yourself, and we'll take a last very quick question. I'm sorry to Lily and Andy.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you, you made a very good point about the collapse of international agreements. I just wonder how long Israel's relationship with the UN is likely to last, or indeed the UN itself. Have you got any views on that?
Look, I know that every year, before the General Assembly assembles, there is a demand of the Arab Pact to kick Israel out from the United Nations, and every year this demand is being overruled. Okay? Because, the normal world votes against it, and it fails every year, but they continue trying. You actually ask when will the majority of the General Assembly of the United Nations be like the Arab world against us as the Arab world is? However, this is the question. But when I see that countries like the Emirates and Bahrain and Egypt and Jordan and other countries, and recently Morocco, and maybe in the future Saudi Arabia and Sudan, and these are the two countries which people talk about, when they are off the list of the countries which demand the kicking out of Israel from the United Nations, I become more and more optimistic that this thing will not occur in the foreseeable future.
Okay, look, I'm afraid we will have to call it a night at that point. At this point, Mordechai, even with the ongoing threats that you've described, at 74 years of age, Israel is emerging as a powerhouse of the world due to its smart and industrious people, of which you are a prime example. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Please continue to do what you're doing. Israel needs you, so there can be no talk of retirement. On that note, I want to...
Israel needs you. But Israel needs the Jewish communities all over the world to continue to support Israel, because this is part of Israel's strength.
Yes, very, very much so. Thank you again, Mordechai, and we look forward to catching up with you, hopefully in Israel, now that we can go and visit. Michael, thanks for your participation. Just before we do leave, the L'chaim program with Morris Klein is on now, 3ZZZ. But that's all we have for tonight. You can join us next week when we have Alan Johnson from BICOM, one of the British communal organisations, so we can ask him all the difficult questions then. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with what AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. Please share and like it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you again next week as usual. Bye for now.